I've always loved to hike. It's been my sanctuary since I was a kid. A few years back, after a breakup when I was 34 years old, I went for a hike alone in British Columbia on a long road trip I had planned through Canada. I'd just gotten out of a relationship with the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. Thought she was the one. As it happened, she was having a relationship with someone I considered a brother, one of my closest friends. That kind of betrayal cuts deep. The breakup made me need space, something to get my head cleared and be able to breathe. The wide, solitary roads of Canada were calling me, especially the backwoods forests, away from everyone and everything. I had chosen Crooked Pine Provincial Park in the Kootenays in British Columbia province. I'd heard some good news about it on a couple of outdoor bulletin boards. People called it serene trails and wild environment. That's what I needed. I drove along a rough, curving access road to the end. The road was rutted, barely wider than my car, and heavy forest surrounded me on both sides. By the time I arrived, I got out and just breathed it all in the crisp air, the soft scent of pine, and the stillness. No traffic, no ringing phones, no distractions. I looked at my phone and confirmed what I had already guessed: no signal. Great. I noticed where I was and got my gear ready. I knew hiking by myself, especially in a region not yet charted, was risky, but I enjoyed exploring off-trail. There is some type of freedom in it. I always download maps ahead of time offline because, even without signal, the GPS still works a trick people don't know about. Anyway, I wasn't lost. This story has nothing to do with getting confused in the woods. I'd have preferred that to be the situation. What did happen does not make sense even today. The summit was a vantage point close to the top of a hill roughly 4 or 5 kilometers off. The climb was steep, and I was plodding slowly 2 kilometers an hour at most. About an hour in, it started raining gently. I hate hiking in the rain. I hate the snow or being cold. But rain? It's a no. It gets everywhere, and the trail gets muddy. So cranky, I decided to turn around. I walked along the ridge, my feet slipping a bit on the wet earth, already irritated that the trip was a disaster. But that irritation quickly gave way to fear. When I looked at my car, I knew something was amiss. All 4 tires slashed. Not just flat, but clearly cut. Panic struck immediately. This was no accident or bad fortune. This had been done deliberately. I stood there, gradually turning in circles, peering through the trees for any signs of life. Nothing, only the soft rustle of rain upon leaves. The air was too still. I did not have cell reception, therefore I could not call for help. I thought about trekking the 30 or so kilometers to the next main road, but remaining out there for so long gave me the heebie-jeebies. My best shot was getting back to the lookout point, the same one I'd been heading to before the rain. It was high up, and with luck, it might have enough elevation for a signal. So I decided. I turned about and went back into the forest. I kept an even gait, more wary now. The rain had not let up, and the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, making long shadows fall across the trail. Halfway up the ridge, I could hear a whispered sound behind me, about 40 or 50 meters back. It stopped when I stopped, moved when I moved. I didn't look back. Just kept going, bracing my legs, my heart pounding. I tried to convince myself it was a deer or something, but I knew better. The rustling persisted as I ascended, but the fear did not subside. I eventually made it to the top and was relieved to discover 2 bars of service. I did not hesitate. I dialed emergency services and told them where I was, what had happened, and that I had a roadside service plan. I also told the dispatcher that I thought someone was stalking me. She told me to stay where I was, that someone would be sent to find me. Hanging up was as if a lifeline had been knotted down. But I still had to get back down to the car, and that meant walking back through the woods while the sun was all but lost, and whatever had been following me was still out. I decided not to go back the same direction. That sounded like asking to get caught. I believed that I might loop around, utilizing my phone's map to find a new trail. I ran parallel with the ridge for a while before cutting back into the woods. I had never been through this area before, so I was relying heavily on my offline map and instinct. Initially, all was silent, too silent. Then the sound again, a snapping of a stick this time to my left side. I turned around. Nothing. Continued walking. And then another sound, this one from the rear. My heart raced. There wasn't one person. There were others. I picked up speed. Slow jog along heavy cover. That's where I found what put my stomach in knots, a campsite. It was far off in the woods, hidden from view of any trail. There were a dozen logs in a rough circle, like a meeting place. The fire ring had fresh ashes. Someone had been there, not long ago. I didn't hesitate. I dodged around it and kept jogging, eye flicking over my shoulder every few seconds. Then, to my right, I saw a movement, a foot, vanishing behind a tree. That was it. I took off running. Branches smacked against my arms. My pack thumped against my flesh. I didn't care about silence anymore. I just ran. Behind me, I was hearing them now, lots of them. They were no longer trying to sneak around anymore. And then at last I turned around and what I saw still frightens me. At least 6 individuals, all dressed in white, running at top speed through the woods after me. Like a dream. I did not stop, did not slacken pace. My lungs burned. My legs ached, but I could not stop. And then, through the trees, I saw my car, and next to it, a police cruiser. I ran the rest of the way, collapsed next to the officer, panting for breath. I couldn't even get a word out. When I finally looked around, those people, nowhere. Vanished, like they never existed. The cop had already called in roadside assistance for me, and I was thrilled. I explained everything to him, and what he explained to me gave me the chills. He explained to me that parts of the backcountry in British Columbia have a history of isolated groups, some religious, some cult-like. He explained to me the woods I'd been in were infamous, although not everyone knew in the larger world outside of local communities. Apparently, these folks simply wished to be left alone. However, the thing that irked me the most was his advice. He said I was lucky even to have escaped with my life, and that traveling into unknown forest areas alone is asking for trouble. I've thought about that experience every day since. It's hard to make sense of it. If they didn't want me on their land, why not just confront me? Why stalk and chase me like that? Why slash my tires? Perhaps I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But sometimes I catch myself wondering what would have occurred if I hadn't turned back when I did. I've hiked numerous times since then, but now I hike along established trails. I no longer go looking for secluded areas. Some things are better left unexplored. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I've been hiking seriously for over 25 years now. My name's Martin Reyes, and I'm 54. Hiking's been a major part of my life, and over the years, I've walked nearly every major trail in Canada. I've also been to about 80% of the national parks here, from Alberta to Nova Scotia. As would be expected, after having done it for all those years, I started looking for new ways to make the adventure exciting again. I've just started doing a new hobby, searching on satellite view using EarthNav for faraway, unnamed woods and then just going out to look at them. It's not necessarily orthodox, I realize, but that is kind of the point. There is something special about hiking a place nobody ever writes about. Sure, there is more likelihood of getting lost, but I thought it was worth it. At least I did. I always carry a roll of homemade route markers with me. They are small, high-visibility stickers with which I label the trunks of trees every couple of 100 feet. They remind me where I've gone, and when I return, I simply remove them, leaving no hint behind. It's a simple system, but one that was very effective. I'm surprised more folks don't use it. With those markers, it's essentially impossible to get lost, so I thought. This time around, I was thinking of a more practical location, Pine Creek Forest, just outside Mount Tyrrell in northern British Columbia. It used to be a small logging community that vanished somehow during the early 1900s after a series of mysterious disappearances. Nowadays, it's a closed conservation area. Even the locals say that the land is cursed or haunted, but I don't really believe any of those things. I'm not superstitious. Never have been. The no trespassing signs didn't perturb me too much. I was accustomed to being in off-limits places. Generally, it would imply that I'd be alone in the entire forest, and that was okay with me. Also, being originally from British Columbia, the ride wasn't all that terrible. I parked my car on a gravel road off of an ancient access trail and headed out into the forest at noon. That way, I'd have plenty of daylight before I needed to get back. The moment I stepped inside, however, the forest felt off. It really was as quiet as others had said. Not peacefully quiet, or serenely so, but completely, utterly quiet. No wind, no birds, no insects whatsoever. Just my breathing and footfalls. You never know how much nature noise there is in a forest until it is gone. I tried to shake it off as I walked, placing my stickers on trees at random. Later, the silence began to get under my skin. I kept hoping for my ears to catch at least a bird chirp or some rustling in the bushes, but nothing. I even began to look forward to seeing another human, just for reassurance. And I don't usually enjoy seeing people on hikes. Soon, the silence didn't faze me quite so much. I got into a rhythm, and finally, for the first time since I'd gotten there, I was calm. But it didn't last long. Abruptly, I became aware of something that amazed me, something between a moan and a howl, the kind of thing an injured animal would utter. That is as good as I can do. Even now, it is difficult to describe. It was the only sound in the whole forest, and that made it even more frightening. I stood there, listening to see if I could make sense of it. Maybe it was the wind, I thought to myself, but the air was completely still. There was not even a whisper of wind. I finally reasoned with myself that it was likely just some injured animal, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed that. I turned away from the commotion, and in a matter of minutes, it was gone. But it stuck with me. Part of me wanted to leave the forest immediately, but I kept going. I kept thinking that if something else odd happened, then I would turn around. As I progressed further, I started asking myself how an animal had been hurt so deep into a distant forest. Was a hunter nearby? I hadn't heard anyone shoot. Maybe the shot was before my arrival. Or maybe someone just left an injured animal to die, which didn't sit well with me. All these were crossing my mind when I saw something strange on the tree ahead of me. There were lines gouged into the bark, not words or letters, but strange slashes and areas of gouged out bark. These symbols did not make sense to me. I started examining the trees around me. More markings, different shapes, some more deeply cut, but all odd and deliberate. That was enough. I determined that I had observed what I needed to observe and walked away, taking my trail markers with me. I used not to fright so easily, but something about those carvings unsettled me. Backtracking along the trail, I noticed something amiss. Ahead, in a small clearing I hadn't yet reached, was an opening to a cave, more a shallow den, probably big enough for a bear to fit into. I stood still. I knew me, and there was no way I could have gotten something that obvious wrong coming in. That's when I realized something even better. My trail stickers were off. They were meant to be at shoulder level. Now, they were at my waist. That meant someone had moved them. On purpose. My heart dropped. Someone had been tailing me. Someone had been misleading my trail markers into diverging from the path straight toward that cave. I spun and ran, fast, glancing back over my shoulder, attempting to see who was behind. I no longer minded the sound. The whole forest was so quiet that my every step echoed around me. I ran blindly for a moment or two, pounding heart, searing lungs. I did finally catch my breath and pulled out my phone. To my surprise, I had one bar. I pulled out the map, found where I had dropped the car, and figured out what way to go. Within seconds, the signal was gone, but I didn't care. I now knew where I was going. That's when the crying resumed, louder now, closer. I did not look back. I simply ran, as quick as I've ever gotten my life probably. Whatever it was behind me now. I could feel it. I glanced back every other second, and I never caught anything. The sound never let up. It was chasing me, getting louder with every step I took towards the edge of the forest. At last, after what felt like an eternity of 10 minutes, I saw the road through the trees. As soon as I came out of the forest, the sound stopped. Like that. I lost no more time. I drove into my car, turned the engine on, and left, not even glancing back. That was the day I decided everything was different for me. I haven't gone hiking since. I've tried coming up with a rational explanation. Maybe some hermit or off-the-grid survivalist lives in that forest. Maybe he saw me, decided to mess with me, and used some kind of whistle to make those awful noises. Maybe he wanted to lure me into that cave and who knows what else. But even that reason has loopholes. How can a person chase me blowing a whistle so exceedingly loud and for such a long time? And why? What was the motive? All I know is that there has to be some reason why that forest is off limits. And whatever that motive is, I don't want to know. Last time, I was around 18. Our house in Maple Creek was the ultimate hangout for the crew. There were some reasons for it. My dad had converted our basement into a full-fledged man cave. It included a pool table, a blasting stereo system, and better still, a mini fridge full of beer at all times. He did not mind us drinking, provided we remained downstairs and did not trouble him. My parents were pretty laid back like that. They just leave us to our own devices and hardly ever descend to check what we were up to. We had this huge piece of land out in the quiet suburbs of Alberta, and just at the back of our house there was a thick block of bush. If you walked through it for a good 15 minutes, you'd come out on an old gravel road. Down that road was a big collection of chain-link fences, behind which was a fragment of the North Bank Reservoir. I'd been trespassing there since I was 12. Fact is, I'd made so many holes in that fence throughout the years that the water authority simply gave up on repairing them. Technically, it was illegal to visit there, but to me, it was a haven, a kind of sanctuary where I could be alone. I'd visit to think, swim, or just get away from the world. It was peaceful, quiet, and beautiful, especially during the late afternoon when sunlight sparkled off the water. It was one of the only things I actually missed about those high school days. There was this one Saturday evening in early May when my friends and I hung out in the basement, playing pool, while some insufferable EDM pumped out of the speakers. Chester, always with some random idea, cried that we should go out for a walk to the reservoir. Everyone was getting restless anyway, so we all agreed. It was not yet night, so we did not think it would be too tough to go there and return. There were 5 of us that night. Me, Chester, Rick, Jasper, and Hakeem. I do not recall the little things, but I believe I recall Rick and Hakeem having some beers along on our walk. Those two imbibed in our crew. I'd already had a few, so I passed. The woods were still pretty wet from rain earlier in the week, but that didn't stop us. We walked through the fence and took the familiar path down to the water. There was a high ledge on the side nearest the reservoir that we enjoyed. Sitting on it gave a nice view out over the water. We sat there for a bit, just chatting and watching the ripples. But eventually somebody suggested that we cross over to the other side. It was more secluded over there and had this smooth, lengthy stretch of shoreline we had nicknamed the beach. We'd have to go all the way around the rim of the reservoir, crossing it where the bank narrowed and then following the path on the opposite side in order to arrive. We walked for approximately 20 minutes before we reached the other end. That is when everything did not seem right. Hakeem stopped cold and held up his hand. He was indicating to our right, towards something very far away. We were still a good distance from the beach, and whatever it was off of our side of the reservoir but far down the path. We all stopped talking and looked. Something or someone was trudging through the trees toward the water. We were sort of psyched at first. We figured we might see another group sneaking in, or perhaps someone out fishing. But then we caught sight of what the figure was pulling along. It appeared to be some big black trash bag, and it wasn't light at all. The person had to stop every few feet and shift it. The whole atmosphere changed instantly. Our grins fell off our faces. Nobody said anything. We just kind of stood there and stared. I didn't want to make assumptions, but the reservoir had a dark history. There'd been a couple of times bodies been found floating in the water, so our minds ran wild. We sat in silence, watching as the figure came closer to the water's edge, got down beside the bag, and started to do something that we couldn't quite tell. Possibly opening it, possibly shutting it. We didn't linger to find out. We started to withdraw slowly. But just before we were about to leave, Chester leaned forward and whispered something and pointed again. 3 more people had come out of the woods. 2 of them were each pulling the same black bags, and one of them had a kayak strapped to his head. My gut dropped then. I lived just 20 minutes from one of the roughest cities in the province. If this was either gang activity or some other type of organized crime activity, it would not have taken me by surprise. The first guy climbed into the kayak. The rest of them helped him stuff the bag onto his lap, and he paddled off out onto the reservoir. We watched him dump the bag in the water. He came back to shore, did it again twice more, each time coming back to collect another bag. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. The ringtone sliced into the silence like a knife. I fumbled to turn it off, but too late. All 4 men had stopped and were looking straight in our direction. That was enough. Off we ran. Racing through the woods at night with the threat of being chased is something I would not wish upon anyone. The branches slapped us in the face, and the mud did not make it easy to keep our footing. Rick looked over his shoulder and shouted that they were chasing us. I was running with my heart out of my chest. We sprinted back to our side, frantically trying to find the hole in the fence. I reached first and took off running beside it, trying to find the spot I had cut through a few weeks prior. My brain just could not remember where it was, and the panic escalated. Jasper was yelling at the back of me, and all of us were in full-out survival mode. Then Rick spotted it. It was a few feet in front of us. We sprinted for it. I helped Chester through the hole just as I heard the unmistakable snap of someone stepping on a stick behind us. We didn't stop running. We ran the remaining woods, ran up the hill behind my house, and collapsed onto the lawn. That's when Hakeem took out his phone and called the police. We told them everything. I knew we were going to be in trouble for breaking and entering, but I didn't care anymore. They had a patrol car drive by not long after, and we walked them through what had happened. They went into the woods behind our house and came back with something that made me feel sick. There were dirty footprints leading all the way up to our fence in the backyard, and I knew for sure they weren't ours. I had leaped over our fence into our own backyard. The prints were made by someone else. The police did not find anyone, but they promised to keep an eye out and inform us what was going on with the reservoir. And to our surprise, they did. They pulled 3 bodies out of the water a few days later. It made the front page. My family and I were frightened. My mother claimed to have seen figures walking in the forest at dusk for weeks afterward. She reported catching one sight of a flash of a camera. That was enough to convince us. We sold the home within a year and moved to another town. Even today, I don't think the police ever arrested anyone or even determined who those people were. The whole thing just sort of fell from public sight. What reminded me of all that in a hurry was an article I happened to read last week. A young person from around here had drowned at that same reservoir. It was written off as a meaningless tragedy. But I'm not so sure anymore. That location always did seem to be jinxed, and I still question how many terrible things happened there that no one ever found out.